Welcome to How Preschool Teachers Do It.
This is Alison Kentos. I am an early childhood educator.
And this is Cindy Tarabush. I am an early childhood consultant.
This podcast is for parents and early childhood professionals.
Let our experience and research-based knowledge become your guide.
Hey, Preschool Peeps.
Peeps.
For today's episode, we are going to harken back to an episode that we released February 3rd, 2020 about men in early childhood. You can look that up. We felt we needed to expand on that episode. 3 years have gone by since we talked about the importance of welcoming men into early childhood settings from both the viewpoint of a staff member and a family, that children need people of many, many different types and cultures and genders and all sorts of role models, and that it's really shameful that stigmas existed. When we recorded that episode in 2020, stigmas existed about men in early childhood classrooms. And I'm here to tell you that the stigmas still exist 3 years later.
Yeah.
And I feel like we just haven't done enough to fight that discrimination.
I agree with that. I don't think much of anything has been done to fight that discrimination.
I mean, based on conversations that I've had recently, I think nothing's been done. I think people are maybe a little more hesitant to bring it up. And I'll give you an example. I've participated, as I do sometimes for consulting clients, I've participated in the goings on around searches for personnel. Like if you're searching for a director, assistant director, principal, like these sorts of searches, sometimes I provide advice for or help with vetting processes because
It's hard.
It's a very hard thing to do, and you want to get as many eyes on that as possible.
Okay.
So I was participating in this search, and a wonderfully qualified man was offered a position of leadership in a program. And the question came up when we were meeting about this person. Those people in the know who we were having a meeting about the path forward. The question came up, and I'm going to tell you what, I think it took a little bit of bravery to ask it. Some people might say a little bit of bias, but I think also a little bit of bravery to say to what was essentially a room full of women, to say, I'm concerned about the family's reactions to this male who we're hiring. And, it gave me pause because I get that there would be that concern. I understand that people may have that concern. And this one person was willing to voice it, but maybe not everybody was.
Yeah.
My response was something that I couldn't even believe was coming out of my mouth. Maybe our preschool peeps will believe it, because sitting in my position, you might have said the same thing. I don't know, but here's what I said. And I said, as I was saying it, I said to them, I want you to know how much I dislike saying what I'm about to say to you. I really, really dislike it. It goes against everything that I believe is right. The question's been asked, and I believe I have to say this. Because this person has been hired in a position of leadership rather than a full-time classroom position, I think you'll be fine. And everyone on the call, we were on Zoom, everybody on the call starts almost simultaneously nodding and shaking their heads at the same time. She makes a good point, and I really dislike that.
Well, yeah. Because I think that is exactly the way it still is in early education, is that you do not see men in classroom positions anymore. I actually think you see less of it now than you did when I first started in teaching.
You know what, though? Like this program that I'm talking about, where I had this conversation, they have had men, but they've hired them in sort of assistant floater positions, not so much permanent classroom, not lead teacher in a classroom.
Yeah. But why?
For children under the age of 6, I'm talking.
Yeah. But
Right.
why? Why is it still like that?
Because it's the same discrimination that we several things. I think it's several things that we have to combat. One is an internal, unspoken bias that women must be more nurturing than men. That's not necessarily the case. Men can be very caring and nurturing, and children need to see that. I believe we talked about that in 2020 on that episode. I think we did. But I think it's so many things. I think it's just so many biases all wrapped up into one. You know, the thing about men diapering children, as if women diapering children couldn't cause harm.
As if these men aren't going to be or aren't already fathers who diaper their children. You know,
seriously. I mean, we are talking about someone who's a parent. And who's being background checked, right? We don't take, in early childhood, we're not taking people blindly. In the state in which Alison and I work, there are two different kinds of background checks you have to go through: criminal and child abuse records. Mm-hmm. We're not, oh my gosh, like, I don't even know, it's one of those situations where sometimes things happen and the news story happens, and then it's generalized to me, and people start to think everybody's going to behave that way, everybody. Yes. But actually, it's just a news story. It's a very sad and unfortunate news story.
And it's one person out of how many? You know what I mean? And it's like,
I was so upset that I had to say that sentence, Alison, that I had to say, because he's in a position of leadership, I don't think you're going to get any pushback. And I despise having to say that. I don't even like that I think it. And everybody's nodding as I'm saying that. Like, what? There hasn't been enough talk around that. I think that there's talk happening around the lack of pay for early child care providers. Yes. And there have been grants put out to help combat that people can get retention bonuses in some states, that they can get bonuses now, especially since the pandemic, right, for staying. Yes. I think there's been talk about the wage disparities at the national level. I don't know that there's been a lot of action based on it, but at least there's talk, at least there's talk. Eventually, hopefully talk will lead to action. Yes. There's been a lot of talk about that. There's been a lot of talk about educational levels. There's been a lot of talk about providing money so that people can get the education they need to do the right thing for the young children. And they don't have to be discriminated against if they come from a background where that was impossible for them to get that education. No, here's money. We will give you that education. I don't know that anything's been done around, let's look at gender discrimination in the hiring practices of early childhood settings.
Yeah, but I think it goes further back than that. Why aren't we encouraging men to study education in college? And they don't. And if they do decide to study education in college and become a teacher, it's never at this level. It's rare at this level. It's usually the high school level or the middle school level. Yeah,
you're right. I mean, I was just going to say, I have men in my family who are teachers, but they taught at the middle school, high school, later elementary level, maybe.
Never at the early childhood level, right?
Yeah.
So why aren't we trying to recruit them to say, hey, I see that you want to be a teacher. Have you thought about teaching the younger children? Why?
Because of the discrimination.
But they know I'm not going to get a job in it. But that's an issue, right? Yeah.
But also, it doesn't pay anything, right? So, and we still have this gender discrimination where the society is willing to steer women toward low-paying jobs, but not men.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the reasons why the pay doesn't go up, right? Yeah. The pay doesn't go up because we'll steer women there. I can't stand this whole conversation. I finally sat down and watched, it's a mini series. Probably going to get this wrong. Was it on Hulu? Well, the Preschool Peeps can correct me. It may have been on Hulu. It was Mrs. America, about
Cindy,
the women's movement.
I watched that. That on your recommendation. And yes, it was on Hulu. And
Thank you.
Oh my God, it was amazing. And it was a whole bunch of stuff I never learned before. Okay.
So here I am. And I'm older than Alison, right? So I remember the players maybe at a different level than you do. People like Bella Abzug, Gloria Steinem, other people who were involved in the women's movement whose names are escaping me right now. Betty Friedan,
who fought against
well, Phyllis Schlafly fought against
she fought
it.
against it, and that was the part of the episode that really kind of floored me. Was like, what?
Yeah, Mrs. America, folks. If you were young or not yet born during the 1970s women's movement, highly recommend. So anyway, I remember the names and some of the players, but it was never made a big part of my life at all. Yeah. And so there was a lot of information that I didn't know. And as I was watching it through my lens, because we all have a lens, and I'm watching it through my lens of the career that I have, I'm just sitting there like, oh my gosh. And it's still low paying jobs are recommended more for women. And why is it still low paying? Because men aren't in there. And why aren't men in there? Because of the discrimination against men in their relation to young children, which is just a generalizing of bias. Yeah. And so here's what I think, right? We always, as I often say in this podcast, we're always trying to land on some kind of recommendation for our preschool peeps. And we can wring our hands about this all we want, but unless we take action, nothing is happening. Yeah. I think that what we need to do is contact not only legislators, but also the associations that work to lobby the legislators. Like, for example, the National Association for the Education of Young Children, 0 to 3. The National Child Care Association. All these organizations, and you probably have local chapters where you are, or if you're in another country, we're listened to internationally. If you're in another country, maybe you need to figure out how to leverage whatever is in the country you're in. In the United States, we have things like NACI and the National Association for Child Care and all that.
In other countries, this is a problem. Maybe men are in early education in other countries. Is it just this country? It's a great question.
It's a great question.
I would love to hear from people.
Me too. So if you're listening to us from outside the United States, what's it like there? Do you have men in your early childhood settings? Because here, it's not a lot of people, not a lot of men still. Maybe what we need to do is actually bring to the attention of these lobbyists that, yes, we want more pay. That goes hand in hand with having more men, sadly. And right? But it does. And wanting to have more men goes hand in hand with increasing pay. Yeah. And the fact that children need all different types of role models. Because when you don't see yourself in the people around you, you think there's something wrong with you as a young child.
Yes.
It's one of the things we're learning from the transgender community. Yes. That when people who are transgender were growing up and they looked around and they didn't see anything that had anything to do with who they are, that they could potentially feel like there's something wrong with them or they're not accepted. Yes. And they have to decide, how do I walk out into the world in a way where I can be accepted? Something that we should not have to think about as young children. We should just be able to be who we are. Yes. And I think this goes along the same lines. When we have programs that have only females and that's all the children see, we are not then representing the world to them. And that's part of our job, to represent the world to them.
Yeah. And there's only so much I can do as a woman. Like, I do not know what it's like to be a boy. I do not know what it's like to be transgender. I don't know. Okay. Because I'm not a boy and I'm not transgender. So I don't know what that's like. And there's only so much I can do to help. I feel like that's why we need a whole bunch of different types of people, so that there is someone that those children can go to.
We have to start to say to the lobbyists, the politicians, the Board of Education, all these people, whoever runs things, we have to start to say, we need campaigns to get more men. And we need the wages for everyone. We need the education for everyone. We need to encourage this. so that Cindy never has to sit in a conversation again with someone saying, are the families going to get upset because this is a man?
Yeah. I think the fact that
And
is
it's
even asked is quite ridiculous.
But it's a
In this day and
legitimate
age, I know, but we shouldn't
concern.
be thinking that way. It's 2023.
From someone who is just helping out on a hiring mission. It's a legitimate concern. And the fact that they turned to me and said, what do you think? And I was like, oh my goodness, how do I think we're going to be fine.
Yeah.
And I started out with, I think we're going to be fine. And then I had to explain, and it was just so painful.
Painful. Yeah.
So please help me avoid these conversations in the future by being more vocal about that. Even in the places where you may work or your children may attend, to go to the director and principal and say, I'm curious why no men are among your staff for the children ages 8 and under.
Yeah.
And I picked 8 because that's the end point of what we define early childhood as.
Yeah.
So, we should also have men in kindergarten, first, second, third grade.
Yes. Yes.
And to go and say, I'm curious why I don't see male teachers, and to let people in leadership know that this is something that you would like to see, because they think unless you say to them, this is what I want to see, they don't know what you want to see. They think they're good. And it's really no different than going and saying, we have X number of children from this culture in this program. I'm wondering why we don't have any staff members from that culture. It's really the same conversation.
Yeah.
And for some people, for some reason, I think people are more willing to have that conversation than the one about having men in early childhood classrooms.
Yeah.
Sad, but true.
So sad.
So I guess this episode is really about awareness, my personal conversation pain, and helping that to end by we need to be more vocal. If you're a parent listening to this, please go back and say, I would love to have more of a mix here of people of different genders, because I think that's important for young children. Again, if you don't say it out loud to leaders, they either think we're good the way we are, or they don't want it.
Yeah.
Some things need to be said, and that was one of them. Okay, so aside from my conversation that I was not excited to have, we do want to be more excited when we talk about there's a place in the world. Everybody hang on with me here. Don't leave the podcast, because there's a place in the world that actually, we usually, when we do look at our rankings, it's very often United States number 1, Canada number 2, which makes sense. We're English speaking. Often Australia after that. We get the English United Kingdom. We get the English speaking countries. And generally they are North America, part of Europe, right?
Yeah.
United Kingdom, part of Europe.
Yeah.
Australia. So surprisingly, when we looked at our statistics before recording this episode, surprisingly, in a really great way, it was number 1, the United States. Number 2, over the past 7 days, Rwanda.
Number 2. That's like a huge climb.
That's
right?
huge. That is huge, Rwanda.
Yeah.
So if you are in Rwanda and you are listening to us, oh my gosh, to climb over the past 7 days, to sort of hurdle past the United Kingdom, Australia and Canada, who are always up there, to hurdle past them and be right under our country, the United States of America, is amazing. So thank you so much, Rwanda. Spread the word. We're thrilled about that. And then within the United States, we do have a state in the tops that I think we have not shouted out before. Montana.
Ooh, hi, Montana.
Hello, Montana. I've seen lots of pictures and things in movies, but I haven't been there. Maybe I'll get there.
Yeah.
Understand it's just beautiful there.
Yeah, that's what I heard.
Yeah. So thank you, people in Montana, for listening to us. And don't forget to check out our website and all the different links and places and things that it can take you to, howpreschoolteachersdoit.com. We will catch you next time on the podcast, where maybe I will have had better conversations.
We'll see.
Ay, ay, ay. All right, folks. Catch you next time on the podcast.
Bye, peeps.